Okay, let's get started. So I would like to welcome you guys to Web It Speaks webinar series. Today's topic is where is ASP.NET headed? Before I continue, I would like to ask you guys to please raise your hand and go to webinar. This way I'll know you're hearing me. So now go to webinar, please raise your hand. Thank you, appreciate that. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to type them in the questions box. I'll go over the questions at the end of the session, and then I'll try to answer the questions. Okay, so let's get started. Then one small request. So I have a fairly horrible sore throat and fever. I'll do my best to speak as loud and clear as possible. Okay, so let's discuss a bit of ASP.NET 4.x and .NET Framework 4.x before we discuss ASP.NET Core, which is basically the future of ASP.NET. So if you are already using ASP.NET, most likely you will have either version 3 or you'll most likely have version 4, since version 4.x is the latest version. So it's something like 4.6. That's the current version. Same goes for .NET Framework as well. And that is actually the last version of ASP.NET as well as .NET Framework. It's not that ASP.NET and .NET Framework are dead. It's just that now it's headed towards a different direction. So you will never get to see ASP.NET version 5. There will be no .NET Framework version 5 either. Previously, Microsoft was planning on creating version 5, but after that, they changed the direction altogether. So now it's basically known as ASP.NET Core. Similarly, we have .NET Framework Core. So 4.x, they still exist, but you'll want to consider these as sort of legacy frameworks. They will still be supported for a very long time to come, because definitely it's not possible for all the companies to switch to the ASP.NET Core or .NET Framework Core right away. So it will definitely take quite a few years, if not months. Then you can still continue to use version 4.x if you want. But keep in mind that there's no long-term future of these frameworks. Instead, we have the core version, or the ASP.NET Core and .NET Core. Okay, so in this webinar, I'll go over what exactly .NET Core is, what is ASP.NET Core, what are some of the ASP.NET Core features, some of the components of ASP.NET Core. Then we will see how we can develop applications by using Visual Studio Code. I'll show you how to download Visual Studio Code. I'll discuss various platforms or operating systems on this particular tool. Then how to download the SDK, etc., and so on. Then runtime as well. Then I'll show you a couple of small demos on my side. Okay, so let's first of all start off with what is .NET. So like I mentioned previously, .NET Framework version 4.x, that's the last version of .NET. After that, you'll never get to see version 5, etc., and so on. So .NET Core is basically a cross-platform, free and open source to .NET Framework. So whatever you usually do in regular .NET Framework, most of the things you get to do in .NET Core as well. So currently it is sort of a cut-down version. So .NET Core is sort of a cut-down version of .NET Framework. Not each and every feature is supported, but majority of them are supported. In just a bit, I'll talk about what is not supported as well. .NET Core contains core CLR, just like .NET Framework. The regular .NET Framework contains the CLR. It shares a subset of .NET Framework APIs. Like I mentioned, that it's sort of a cut-down version of the full-blown .NET Framework, but majority of the features are supported. It also contains the core runtime, which is basically equivalent to the .NET Framework native runtime and so on. By using .NET Core, you can create ASP.NET Core web applications. I'll talk about ASP.NET Core web apps. You can also create console command line sort of applications, libraries, reusable libraries, and you can also create universal Windows platform apps. Notice that you cannot create Windows Forms or WPF applications by using .NET Core. If you already have lots of existing Windows forms and desktop applications, you'll want to continue with .NET Framework unless and until you switch over to .NET Core, which allows us to create universal Windows platform apps on your Windows 10, Windows 8 as well. Place them in a Windows App Store. Plus, you can also run the application on your cell phone as well. So although Windows Phone is not very popular, but still you can create universal applications that runs on your Windows Phone as well as on the desktop. And actually, the applications, they also run on Xbox One as well. So they are basically the UWP apps. So by using .NET, you cannot create Windows Forms or WPF applications, at least in the current version. So the latest version is version 2 of .NET Core. It's still in a beta version right now, or beta phase right now, but still it's not possible to create the regular Windows Forms and WPF applications. If you want to create desktop apps, go for UWP apps. Continue to use WPF or Windows Forms. Yeah, you have no option but to continue with .NET Framework. So basically, the main benefit of .NET Core is that you create the application once and it runs on lots of platforms. It's cross-platform. It runs on Mac, Linux, Windows, and so on. .NET Core, so it is also equivalent to ASP.NET version 4.x, and it's free and open source web framework. Whereas the regular ASP.NET is proprietary. It's not open source. But ASP.NET Core is totally open source. You can see the code on GitHub, etc. If you want. That's the next instance on any platform, on Windows, on Linux, on Mac, and so on. In fact, later on, I'll show you a demo where I'll demonstrate how you can create a ASP.NET application on Linux. I'll utilize Ubuntu, but you can use the same thing do the same thing on Red Hat, CentOS, etc., and so on. So ASP.NET Core is sort of a subset of the full-blown ASP.NET framework. If you have heard of SignalR, it's an API that's available on the regular ASP, not available in ASP.NET Core. But other than that, you can create your MVC-based applications. You can also create your REST-based services by using Web API as well in ASP.NET Core. Some of the salient features of ASP.NET Core are, number one, it's a no-compile developer experience, which basically any text editor make the changes to your code, and you never have to compile the code manually at all. In the regular ASP.NET, the non-core one, you must have seen that you usually have to compile the code. You usually end up generating the .dll files for your controllers, etc., and so on. And that's sort of a manual process. You have to compile, build the application, then you have to deploy it, and so on. Whereas in ASP.NET Core, this is basically no compile developer experience. You don't have to compile the code manually at all. Then another benefit of ASP.NET Core is that it's a modular framework. It's distributed as the NuGet packages. If you have used NuGet in ASP.NET, you must have seen that you can download libraries like jQuery, Angular, Bootstrap, etc., and so on. So likewise, ASP.NET Core heavily utilizes this NuGet package manager concept. It's also cloud optimized, which means that you can deploy your applications to, let's say, Windows, Azure, etc., regardless of what OS you're using. It could be Linux, it could be any flavor of Linux, like Ubuntu or Debian-based Linux, or it could be Red Hat or a variation of Red Hat or Windows, etc., and so on. So that is a major benefit of ASP.NET Core. You create the application on any platform, Windows, Mac, Linux, and so on. And it's totally open source, community focused, which means that you rapidly get to see the updates and patches and bug fixes and so on. ASP.NET Core does include Entity Framework Core, which allows us to access the databases. So if you have used Entity Framework in the regular .NET framework, we have the same concept available in ASP.NET Core as well. So you can utilize this EF core for the sake of accessing your databases. So it basically allows you to create the or utilize the ORM concept, object relational mapping, which it also contains MVC core, which allows you to create the model view controller sort of applications, web applications. Plus, it also has the Razor core, which allows you to utilize the Razor syntax in your HTML pages. So you might have seen .cs HTML files or @symbol-based syntaxes in ASP.NET MVC, so the same syntax is available in ASP.NET Core as well. Then for development purpose, you can utilize pretty much any text editor. There's no limitation as such. You can use Notepad, or on Linux, you can use gedit, you can use Nano, you can use VI. It's totally up to you. You can actually use the command line or the shell sort of utilities for the sake of building your or deploying your code, etc., and so on. But obviously, you'll want to use a more professional sort of editor. So for that purpose, you can choose to utilize Visual Studio Code. I'll demonstrate in just a bit. Visual Studio Code is also free. It's open source. It's developed by Microsoft. It works on Windows, Linux, as well as on the Mac OS as well. Plus, it has built-in support for debugging various types of applications. You can also utilize the Git as the source code management solution. There's syntax highlighting, code compilation. You can utilize code snippets for the sake of automatically generating some lines of code. A very simple example would be you want to generate for each syntax or something like that, and so on. You can also utilize code refactoring for the sake of organizing your code if you want. Languages-wise, it supports lots and lots of languages. This is not an exhaustive sort of list, but it does give us an overview of what languages are supported. So C#, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, T-SQL, Java, C++. And if you're using Docker on, let's say, Linux or even on Windows, which allows us to create containers, you might have seen the Docker file, which allows us to specify how exactly we want to create the container, what should be deployed to the container, and so on. So for that, we usually create a Docker file, which has its own syntax. So there's syntax highlighting for Docker file as well. Similarly, PHP, PowerShell, Perl, TypeScript, which is heavily utilized in the latest version of Angular. So Angular, the latest version 4, utilizes TypeScript. So that's supported as well by Visual Studio Code. Objective-C is also supported as well, which means you can create your iOS-based applications or Mac-based applications in Visual Studio Code. Similarly, Swift language is also supported. Markdown is supported. And you can also utilize various JavaScript-based frameworks as well. Like you can create Node.js applications. You can create React, Angular applications in Visual Studio Code. So it does have support for downloading various extensions for Node.js, React, Angular to let you run and debug the applications as well, and so on. So it's definitely a very, very useful, free, open source code editor. For downloading Visual Studio Code, you can go to its website. It will let you download for Windows. You can also download it for Linux. If you have Debian-based Linux like Ubuntu or Mint, etc., you can download the Debian package. Or in case of Red Hat, CentOS, Fedora, you can download the RPM package and so on. Similarly, there's a package available for Mac as well. If you have to develop applications for .NET Core or ASP.NET Core, if you're using Windows, you can choose to use command prompt. So in just a bit, I'll discuss .NET SDK, which contains various command line utilities that allows you to create the project structure and run the application, etc., and so on. So command prompt can be utilized if you want. Or you can also utilize Visual Studio Code as well, which is the free open source editor. And if you already have Visual Studio and you're using Windows as the OS, then you can utilize your existing Visual Studio for the sake of creating your .NET Core or ASP.NET Core applications. So in case of Visual Studio 2015, you do have to download the extension separately because out of the box, it doesn't let you create ASP.NET Core applications. So you can download the extension for 2015 by following this particular link. Or if you already have 2017 version of Visual Studio, then it has the ability to create .NET Core sort of applications out of the box. In case of Linux, you can use the shell or the terminal. You can use the command line sort of utilities for the sake of creating the project structure, etc. Then as the text editor or code editor, you can choose to use gedit, vi, nano, or Visual Studio Code. So in just a bit, I'll show you a demo on Linux. I have Ubuntu flavor of Linux. I'll show you how we can utilize a combination of shell as well as Visual Studio Code for the sake of creating ASP.NET Core application. And in case if you're using Mac, we have similar options available there as well. You can use the shell or the terminal, or you can use Visual Studio Code as well, or a combination of these two if you want. Then in order to make use of .NET Core or ASP.NET Core, you do have to download the SDK first of all. So when you search for .NET Core SDK, and you go to the official website, which is basically Microsoft-based website. It's maintained by Microsoft. It's owned by Microsoft. So when you go to the website, it will show you the SDK download options. You can download SDK for Windows. You can download it for Mac. You can download it for Linux. Plus, you can also download the tools as well. So tools if you have 2015, you can follow this particular link. It will let you download the tools for Visual Studio 2015, so you can create your .NET Core based applications. It basically installs some templates, plus it also installs the .NET Core SDK automatically. Otherwise, in case of 2017, you don't really have to download it. The only reason why you'd want to follow this link is you want to have the latest version of .NET Core installed. Otherwise, if you already have Visual Studio on the DVD, or if you have downloaded the ISO image file, it does have the out-of-the-box ability to create .NET Core-based applications. But it might be a bit older version compared to the latest version, which is not such a big deal. You can update Visual Studio. It will download the latest version of SDK automatically and so on. Installation on Windows is very straightforward. It's just the binary file or the installer file. You just launch the setup file, and basically that is it. It does everything for us automatically. But in case of Linux, you do have to execute quite a few commands and so on, because we have to deal with the package managers, etc., and so on. So in just a bit, I'll discuss some of the code as well, or the command line command lines that we usually have to execute on Linux in order to install the SDK. Likewise, if your goal is to just deploy your application, then for deployment purpose, you don't need to have the full SDK installed. You can install just the runtime so that you can run the application on that particular machine. So again, we have various options for pretty much all major operating systems, Linux, Windows, Mac, and so on. And you can always choose to use this LTS, a long-term support version of .NET, which is recommended as well. Otherwise, you can go for the latest version. But keep in mind that latest version, it does usually have bugs, etc., and so on. Whereas long-term support is usually a better option. Okay, so here, let me show you how we can, first of all, set up, first of all, let me just show you on Windows. So if you already have, let's say, Visual Studio 2015 or 2017, and you try to create a new project, under web category, it will show you ASP.NET Core web application. We can see this is a .NET Core based ASP.NET application. Or you can still choose to use ASP.NET Core web application. And you can say that as sort of the SDK or the runtime, I still want to use my regular .NET framework. So that is still possible. You can create ASP.NET Core applications that still makes use of the full-blown, the regular .NET framework. But keep in mind that you'll still be a bit restricted in this case because you will not be able to use some APIs like the Signal R and so on. You can still use ASP.NET MVC. You can still use your web APIs. So majority of the stuff will still work. So here, let's use .NET Core. Specify the location where you want to create your application. And even before that, one more small note here. If I go to, let's say, Windows, notice that we have universal UWP app support as well. But for that, you do have to download one more SDK. By clicking this particular option, it will download another SDK, which will let you create UWP apps by using .NET Core. So here in this webinar, our main focus will be on ASP.NET Core. So let's quickly create a simple application. Okay, it out. Or in fact, in this demo, I'll not really create a full-blown application. For now, I'll just show you the template. After that, I'll go to my Linux-based virtual machine, and I'll show you how we can install the SDK, how we can install Visual Studio Code, then how to set up a simple project, and so on. So here, when you try to create a new .NET Core application, it will give you three options. We have empty, which is recommended if you want to start from scratch. You don't want to have any boilerplate code, no template sort of code should be there, and so on. Otherwise, if you want to have a sample application, you can use this web application option. It will have some ready-made samples, etc., and so on. Or if you want to create a REST-based services in ASP.NET Core, you can use Web API option. So let's use empty here, okay it out. And I forgot to point out one more small thing. You might have seen a Windows Azure option there or Microsoft Azure option. So you can choose to deploy your application to Microsoft Azure if you want. Okay, so basically it's creating the project for us. Now this is a bit different than the regular ASP.NET MVC based applications. It does have some additional files here. For example, we get to see this global.json file where it specifies the folders on the hard drive where your code should be located. So here it's telling us that projects by default, they should be under source, and usually under test, we store the unit tests and so on. So notice that we have this folder here, src. So under source, we have the actual ASP.NET Core application. Plus, we can also see the configuration file, which is a .json file. It's basically a JSON-based file configuration file where we specify the dependencies. Like here, we are saying we want to make use of .NET Core and so on. Another small note here is that for the sake of testing your applications, like you need a web server. So as a web server, you can still choose to use IIS, or if you don't want to use IIS, you can use .NET Core's built-in web server, which is called Kestrel. So Kestrel is a web server that's integrated into .NET Core or ASP.NET Core. So here you can start adding your files, etc., and so on. So rather than continuing with this Windows-based example, let me show you the main demo on Linux-based machine. This way we will know that, okay, .NET works on Linux, and we can create ASP.NET applications and so on. That's where I'll show you Kestrel web server as well and so on. So let me switch over to my Linux-based VM here. Okay, so here I already have Visual Studio Code pre-installed. It's very simple process. You just have to download the package, install it. It's very straightforward. SDK is a bit tricky because it's Linux. So on Linux, we have to, first of all, update the package manager or apt repositories, etc., and so on. Then we have to install the SDK and so on. So here I'll not show you the full-blown demo. I'll just show you the overall commands that we have to execute because it does take quite a bit of time if you have to execute all these commands. It downloads several huge packages and so on. So here, if you want to install SDK on Ubuntu, to be more precise, I'm using 16.04 Xenial basically. So on Linux, you'll want to execute these commands so that you can update your apt repositories or the apt get feed. So here I'm specifying the URLs so that when we try to install additional packages, then these feeds will also be searched in and so on. So here I'm updating the repository basically. Then after that, we can install the SDK. So if you have already updated your apt-get feed, you can execute this command, apt-get install .NET dev, specify the version that you want to download. So this will not work if you haven't updated your apt-get feed. Likewise, if you want to install .NET Core on Red Hat or CentOS or Fedora, you can execute these commands to update your feed. Then after that, you can install the SDK by using yum package manager. Likewise, on Mac, you will have to, first of all, update the feed again by using these commands. Then after that, you can download the .NET Core .pkg package file and install it graphically or visually. Then once you have .NET Core installed, you can start making use of it. So if you want to create a project structure, sort of a template basically, then for that, you can go to your terminal. Now here, I haven't added .NET to my path, which I should have done, but I didn't, so that's fine. For now, I'll just specify the complete location. So it's root, in my case, then .NET/.NET. So here we are able to execute the main command line utility provided by .NET Core, which allows us to create a project structure. It allows us to run our application. It allows us to download the missing dependencies, etc., from the NuGet package manager, and so on. So this .NET allows us to execute quite a few useful things, so we can update our package manager, etc., and so on. Okay, so let me first of all create a directory here. Let's say test app, whatever name you want to use. Oh. Okay, so here I can use .NET command. Here I can specify the new argument, and I can specify what type of project structure I want to create. So I want to create a MVC-based application, basically. Otherwise, you can also create Node.js-based applications, Angular-based applications, and so on. Okay, so here I've created this MVC-based project structure. We can have a look at the folder structure. So these files are created by this .NET command. Let me just show you the tree. Okay, so here we can see lots and lots of files are there. We have a bunch of .js files. We will also have .cs files, C# files, etc., and so on. So we have lots of files here, basically. So basically, when you have generated the project structure from the terminal, after that, you can open the project in Visual Studio Code or any text editor, and you can start making use of it. So let's use Visual Studio Code. So it's test app. So you'll want to open the entire folder structure. Unlike regular Visual Studio, where we usually open just the solution file, in case of Visual Studio Code, you'll want to open the entire folder structure. So open folder, go to the folder. So where has that been? Test app. Okay. So basically, this is Visual Studio Code. It has syntax highlighting for lots of languages. You can create Node.js applications, ASP.NET, MVC sort of applications, and so on. Okay, so here we have a sample application. So .NET new MVC generate this boilerplate code for us. If you want to test this application, like notice that we already have home controller, we also have a view here, and so on. So if you want to test this application right away before you create your own controllers and models and stuff like that, then for that you can go to your terminal and run this particular command. So .NET. First of all, you'll want to download the missing dependencies by connecting to NuGet package manager and download all the libraries, etc. and so on. So here we have these files, but the dependencies are currently not there. So the project structure doesn't contain the dependencies. Like in regular .NET framework, you might have seen references folder where it downloads the DLL files and stuff like that and so on. On Linux, obviously, we don't have DLL files, but we still have the dependencies concept here. So you'll want to download the dependencies. So for that, you can execute this particular command, restore. It will download all the missing packages and so on. Okay, so I've downloaded all the missing packages. Then after that, we can run this particular application. So for that, you can pass it this run argument. It will launch Kestrel web server. Then you'll be able to test your application and so on. So for the first time, it does take a bit of time. Like you notice that it took about maybe 6 or 7 seconds or so. So now it's running. So it's using a Kestrel built-in web server. We can see the location, the content root path. We can see the URL as well. So it's localhost :5000. Let's open the web server or a web browser. Access this URL. And notice that there was no compiler involved at all. We didn't manually compile anything at all. We didn't build anything manually at all. Everything gets built automatically. You make even a minor change to your source file, it will compile the code for us and so on. So this is the sample site that's created by the template basically. So when you use that .NET new MVC, it ended up creating these web pages for us and so on. So here, let's add custom controller and model and view to our application. You can keep the Kestrel web server running in the background if you want, or for now, I'm going to shut it down. I'll go to Visual Studio Code. Even here in Visual Studio Code, you can run the application if you want. For that, you have to press F5, then you have to select .NET Core. It will launch the Kestrel web server automatically and so on. Okay, so here I'm going to add a custom model, custom controller, and a custom view to the application because it is an ASP.NET MVC based application. So we can add additional views, models, controllers, etc. and so on. So here I'm going to first of all create a folder, models. You don't need to name it models, but this is usually the common name where we store the custom models. Then to this models folder, I can add the model. Okay, where did models go? Oh, I think I don't have the permission right now. I might have to launch it again. So yes, I don't have the permission. So I'll have to relaunch Visual Studio Code. Let me close VS Code. I'm going to launch it as root for now, and going to pass it this parameter or argument. Okay, so now I should have access to the file system. I should be able to make changes and so on. So let's open the project again, or the folder, test app, okay it out. Then this time around, we should be able to add a folder to it. So models, that's more like it. We have models folder. This is where we can organize our models. So rather than typing in all the code, which will take time, I'll just copy my code from here. Okay, let's add a file to it, login model.cs. So I have a very simple model here. So basically, I'm going to create a simple login form, which will allow us to enter username and password. If username is, and if the credentials are fine, it will welcome the user. Otherwise, it will tell the user that you're not allowed to access the page and so on. Okay, so here we have a simple model. We have a couple of properties here, username and password. Then I can add a controller. For controller, what I'll do is I'll just go to the existing one, which is home controller. I'll copy this code, create another file here. I'll name it something else. I'll call it, let's say, login controller.cs. It's very important that we have controller as part of our class name. I'll change the class name here to login controller. And I'll remove some of these actions from here, like we don't have about page. We don't want to use contact and error sort of pages. We want to create a custom controller, basically, which would return a login web page and so on. Then again, I need to add the post action to it so that when some button on a page is clicked, it should execute our custom action. Okay, so here we have the get action, which is sort of equivalent to page load event. We also have the post action, which is sort of equivalent to button click sort of action. A very simple logic here. We will basically receive the login model from the user interface, which I'll create in just a bit. Then it will check whether username and password is valid or not. If yes, we will display welcome Bob as the message. Otherwise, we'll display access denied. So it's a very simple example, basically. Then we need to create the view as well, the user interface, basically. So for that, I can go to views, and we need to create a subdirectory here, which must match the controller name. So my controller name is login. I can create a subdirectory here, name it login. So this is mandatory. After that, we can add the Razor-based file to it, index.cshtml. Then again, I'll just copy paste the code rather than typing in this entire piece of code. Okay, so here we have a pretty straightforward view. I'm saying that this view should be aware of login model. So I'm basically strongly typing my view to a certain model. Then I'm consuming the model here. Here we have html.begin form. I'm generating a label for username, text box for username, label for password, text box for password. Then we have the submit button, and then I'm also displaying the message on the screen whether user is valid or user doesn't have access to the page. So basically that should do. I can save the file. I can go back to my terminal. You didn't really have to shut down Kestrel. You could have kept it running in the background. So I can run the Kestrel server again, or the web server. It will make the application available on the same port number that we saw previously. Okay, so we again have the same port number available to us. So let's refresh the page, or we can actually just add our controller name to it. So /login. Okay, let me go to my terminal here. So for some reason, it's saying page not found. Login. Let's double check the controller name. Controller name is login. Controller seems to be okay. Let me just quickly restart the Kestrel server, web server again. And while I'm at it, I'll just also download dependencies again, just in case if some dependency is missing. Okay, so it's hosted again. So let's go back to our web server. Let's also ensure that our home controller is working. So basically, at this point, it is compiling the code automatically. And when in future, if you make any change to your source code, it will get recompiled if you try to access the site and so on. So home controller is working. Login controller. Okay, that's a bit awkward. 4 of 4, which shouldn't have happened. Controllers, login controller.cs. Models is there. We have the login folder, index.cs HTML file. All seems good here. So 404 usually happens when the page is not even found, but we do have the page, which I've verified here. Okay, it's still 404 for some weird reason. Okay, what I'll do is I'll have a backup here. So I'll open my backup project. I'll have to troubleshoot why it's not working in this one. Run. Let's try. Let me restore the packages for this one. Okay, I think I've broken my SDK somehow. Let me just go to this one again. Test app. .run. I did have a system crash on this Linux machine previously, but still it should have worked. Is it still 404? That's all. Okay, let me add the debug code here so I can quickly troubleshoot. Okay, so if you want to debug your applications, you usually have to create this environment variable, ASP.NET core environment equals development. So let's quickly do that. Export equals development. Then we can run this again. But since it's showing 404, so that seems to be a bit awkward because it's not an exception on the server side or something like that. Yeah, still it's for some reason it's showing 404. The code is all fine. There's no typo, etc. here. We have login folder, index.cs HTML, login model, login controller. It's all good here. It does take us to the home controller. And let me double check my class name again. Login controller. This is fine as well. Yeah, otherwise, anyway, we at least were able to see the home page. So it's still, for some reason, it's 404. Anyway, the main concept is that you can install .NET SDK on Linux as well. If you're fan on running your applications on Linux, well and good. Otherwise, you can run it on Windows as well. So on Windows, you can still use your regular Visual Studio Code that I was trying to show you previously. It does generate the boilerplate code for us. Then you can still use your package manager here. So you can right-click your project. You can go to manage NuGet packages, or you can actually also use the Bower package manager as well. So Bower package manager is sort of open source option. NuGet is more so of a Microsoft specific option. So you can use this Bower package manager, search for ASP.NET MVC or whatever other libraries you want, like Bootstrap, Angular, Backbone, etc., and so on. So you can still add more frameworks or libraries, etc., to your project, extend your project further, and so on. So bottom line is that .NET Core is cross-platform. It runs on Windows as well as Linux and Mac as well. So that's basically the major benefit. So that is basically .NET Core. Any question regarding this concept? And sorry, one small note here. So when should you continue to use .NET Framework and when you should go for ASP.NET Core? So continue to use your existing .NET Framework if you have heavily invested into Windows Forms or WPF applications. As far as web apps are concerned, most of your apps, you can quite easily convert them over to your .NET Core or ASP.NET Core, as long as you haven't used SignalR API. If you just have the regular MVC and Web API, well and good, you can convert your applications to your ASP.NET Core. But if you have SignalR, you cannot currently do that. Maybe in next version they will add SignalR, but currently it's not available. Entity Framework works. Most of the features work. They work as it is. So ASP.NET Core, use it if you want to have a cross-platform sort of solution. Even if you are developing on just Windows, one of the benefits of using ASP.NET Core on Windows would be that you will have no compile sort of experience. You will not have to manually build your application, compile the application. It will get compiled automatically when you make any change to your source code. Likewise, it's very lightweight compared to your regular ASP.NET. It's lightweight because of the total rewrite. Microsoft has streamlined the HTTP pipeline for ASP.NET MVC based applications if you use .NET Core. So basically, performance is one of the major benefits in ASP.NET Core. The downside to using ASP.NET Core currently is it's still not as mature as the full-blown ASP.NET, because ASP.NET has been there for the last, almost 16, 17 years or so. Even ASP.NET MVC has been there for the last 10 years or so. So it definitely is a bit more mature. But ASP.NET 4.6 is the latest version and the last version. You will not have any new version at all. It will still have some new service packs, etc., bug fixes, etc., and so on, but you will not get to see any additional libraries or additional new features in ASP.NET. So ASP.NET Core is the future. It's still in the early stages, but it's the future. Okay, so any question regarding .NET Core concept, ASP.NET Core? If you have any questions, you guys can type them in the questions box.